also request you to help them by moving as forward as possible. I know that the front two rows are hit by the sun, but everyone else should just move a little forward. So this session has a bit of a story. First, it was called Pink Sari and Mofussil Junction. Then the pink sari lady left. Then it was called Curfew Nights and Mofussil Junctions. Then the Curfew Nights gentleman left. But fortunately, we found Swati Bhattacharya, who is a veteran about writing about issues that lie beyond city limits and beyond some of our, charmed lives. So we are very happy to have her. And the Mufassil junction that always remained constant was provided by Ian Jack. I'd like to welcome them both on stage. Sujata Sen, who is actually the patron saint of the Kolkata Literary Meet.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this session, which I think between us should be quite a lively one. And I'm not too worried that not too many people have turned up, because that will give us probably an opportunity to all of us to have a more intimate discussion. Yeah? And I would expect a lot of questions, because what we are going to discuss probably touches the lives of all of us. Yeah? And we are going to discuss what happens mostly outside the city boundaries, the city limits. And we have two excellent speakers here to discuss on that. Ian Jack has been reporting about India for over 40 years now, Ian? Over 40 years. And he's reported for various newspapers and publications. And he's traveled in very remote areas where even we have not ventured. Many of us in the city have not ventured. And he's found interesting things to explore there and write about it in a very, in a manner which, with literary references, with historical facts, and he brings in contemporary parallels. So when you read it, you really sort of put that incident in a rounded, well-rounded context. So it's always a delight reading Ian about India. And I personally regret that he doesn't write much in the Calcutta newspapers nowadays, but still I think his writings are available on the internet to read.
And to buy.
And to buy, yes, okay, yeah, surely. For a writer, I think that's extremely important, yeah. And we have with us Swati. Now, Swati is the chief reporter of Anandabazar Putrika, but she is more than that. She's perhaps the only journalist I know who really understands and specializes in reporting from rural areas. And she's been doing this for a long time, so much so that her work and her research took her to the Poverty Action Lab in MIT, where she did research again on what's happening outside of city limits. She has produced several research reports on issues that concern people in rural areas, and her writing, and she's passionately involved in that kind of writing. And being the chief reporter, I think she brings in a lot of influence on the Anandabazar Putrika in seeing things from different perspectives and different angles. So welcome to both of them. And I'd first like to just say that I'm back from Jamshedpur, in fact, a little while back. And as I was traveling the train, I was reading the last bits of Ian's Mofussil Junction. And I was also watching lots of things that were going on in the train, especially someone, performing magic. And there was this guy who drank one whole bottle of milk, and he took it out of his ears 1 minute later. And all that kind of stuff, which you only see outside of the city when you travel out. And I think Ian writes about that with that kind of sympathy, humor, and understanding and sensitivity, even without having actually learnt how to speak Hindi or Bengali, but I'm sure he understands that. And first, and I have one or two questions to you, Ian, about your book. Some of the, first of all, may I ask you a question about William Carey? Now, if you ask a Bengali, any Bengali about William Carey, they will tell you he was the first one to start a printing press in Bengal. He was a linguist, he was a naturalist. But when you read Mofussil Junction, you get to know about William Carey's humble origins as a shoemaker in Northamptonshire. And I found the way you treated that subject very interesting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Surely. I went to Sirampur, it must have been about 1989, and I stayed with a missionary family who were in the hostel there. They were very hearty eaters. I remember I had jalebis night and day for about a fortnight. And I was there for an odd reason, really, because if you read 19th century accounts of William Carey's life, you'll see that he's credited with importing the first steam engine into India. Not the first steam locomotive, but the first steam engine. And he imported it because, so the biographies say anyway, because he needed to print more Bibles. He couldn't print Bibles fast enough in translation. And the stock of paper he had was being eaten by white ants. This may be not the strict truth, but anyway, the idea was that he imported the steam engine. It was the first in India. Well, I think that's not quite true. I think the one in the Calcutta Mint was the first one to be imported into India, but never mind. I got very interested in Carey because he was an amazingly multifaceted Renaissance kind of man. He was absolutely singularly hopeless at making any kind of conversion among the native population because his techniques of argument were so crude and very Christian, but very crude. In that, for instance, he said there couldn't be any Brahmins because the Brahmins would have perished in the flood, Noah's flood. So that was the Brahmins written off. So anybody who was saying he was a Brahmin could become a Christian without any bother of loss of caste. Well, naturally people could see through this rather unsophisticated argument, and he wasn't successful. But he was a great botanist and a great linguist. And he came from remarkably humble origins. If we apply the word Mofussil to England or to Britain, I'm certainly from the Mofussil, but so was William Carey. He grew up in Northamptonshire as the son of a cobbler. He was a cobbler himself for a while. And it was during the great age of Reformation and nonconformism in the Church of England, in which there were all kinds of breakaway groups, one of which was the Baptists. And unlike the Church of England in those days, the Baptists believe in conversion, so they were quite willing to go abroad and make Christians out of non-Christians. The British government in India didn't approve of that practice at all, as you will know, and it didn't approve of missionaries because it believed you had to kind of leave the population to their own devices and not upset them too much. So Carey couldn't convert people in Calcutta. In fact, for a long time, he was an indigo planter, come indigo plant manager in North Bengal. And so when he began his missionary work, he actually had to go to the Danish colony, which was Serampore, because the Danes didn't mind his being a Christian missionary. It would have been impossible in Calcutta, as I say. But he came from, it's the kind of, people talk about upward mobility now in the world. But there was a time, even as long ago as the 18th century, when a certain kind of Englishman could be upwardly mobile, as he was, and with tremendous courage, I think. You know, he left Northamptonshire, he moved to London to catch his boat. His boat took ages to reach the Bay of Bengal. His wife died of the usual fevers. He's a remarkably brave and courageous person of his time, and as I say, a completely hopeless missionary. But then so was David Livingstone, who had the same lack of fortune in converting any Africans.
I want you to go back now to Bhagalpur, because I really thought the description of the Bhagalpur blindings was very telling. Because I'll ask, you'll know from my next question why. I want you to tell us a little bit about the Bhagalpur blindings case and what you actually found when you went there to report about it.
Well, I owed my presence in Bhagalpur to a now defunct Calcutta magazine, which was a very good magazine, and sad it's gone, called Sunday. which in those days had a very enterprising young editor called M.G. Akbar, who's since become a politician and a columnist and this and that. But in those days, he was a very enterprising journalist. I must say, I think there's been few as good as he at kind of the sheer kind of energy to find stuff out in this country at that time anyway. So I think Sunday was the magazine that broke the story. So I went to Bhagalpur, which wasn't easy in those days. You had to, if you wanted to get there quickly, you had to fly to Patna and then take a car, and the roads were very, very badly made. And having got there, of course, I discovered what we all know, which was that, I can't remember how many now, but certainly dozens of under trials of prisoners, all from the same caste, I think, known by the British as a criminal caste, who lived in the bit of land between the monsoon level of the Ganges and the winter level of the Ganges, so they had to keep moving back and forth. That, as I say, large numbers of these people had been arrested and blinded, sometimes with needles in their eyes, and sometimes with acid, and sometimes with a combination of both. And it was possible to meet these people and speak to them, which I did. And they were remarkably stoic about what had happened to them, I must say. I don't think anybody's actually suffered from the crime of the Bhagalpur blindings. I mean, maybe a few policemen have gone to jail. I'm not sure about that now. But certainly no politician ever suffered. And the most surprising thing to me, really, it may have been naive, of course, of me, but the most surprising thing, really, was that the townspeople of Bhagalpur took out processions in favour of the blinding when a few policemen were suspended. Now that made it was quite hard for me to understand that, given the level of cruelty that had existed in the blindings. But of course, having said that, I had no idea what these men were alleged to have done. And I had no real idea of the amount of criminality in Bhagalpur. I mean, having said that, I mean, almost shooting somebody makes more sense to me than blinding them, which seems kind of unnecessarily cruel. But there were tensions and moods there which I simply, to this day, have not understood, really, because I think it is a very, very cruel thing to have done. And yet people would come out on the street protesting against policemen who'd been suspended for doing it.
So this was in 1980, wasn't it?
This was I tell you, it was just before John Lennon was shot. And I remember that because when I got back to London, that was the first news I heard.
Yeah. Okay, so my why I brought this up is I wanted to ask both you and Shati in particular whether the Bhagalpur blindings are behind us. I mean, looking at what's happening with Bihar now, Nitish Kumar's rise, and I travel quite often to Bihar. There's a new book out on Bihar, edited by Nicholas Stern and Ken Singh, and it's got Lord Billy Moria and Amartya Sen already, really extolling the virtues of Nitish Kumar. And there's, you would think that Bhagalpur is sort of behind us. Is it really? What have we witnessed in Birbhum recently? And Shati, how would you describe what's happening there?
Well, violence and cruelty are certainly not behind us. They do happen even now in an organized manner. Having said that, it is often difficult to categorize what is happening in one community within one sort of normative framework from outside. In Birbhum, what we have learned and what we have got about the crime that has happened to one 20-year-old tribal girl is primarily from the FIR that she has herself filed in the police station. But countering that are the stories, the narratives that the community itself has to tell. And there has certainly been what we would consider violations, such as tying the girl to a tree all night and then setting up a kind of a community court, a trial, public trial, where she was accused and she was fined. And the crime of which we are speaking right now the most, which is a gang rape, it is unclear. That is the part that is being disputed right now. But the former part, that she was accused of having a relationship with a man from a different community, and this she was threatened to get out of the, she was asked to get out of the village, to leave her home if she continued the relationship. She defied the community. She was tied to a tree all night. She was brought on a public trial, humiliated. None of that has really been disputed even by the community. But the fact of the matter is that the community does not see itself as doing any wrong by setting up that public trial. And in fact, the community, the Adivasi Samaj, that is to say the society of the tribals, they accuse us, the media, of writing in a way which denigrates their customs, their way of life. And they think that this whole idea that a woman can go on living outside wedlock with a man who is married and from another community is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to them. It may be acceptable to us, but they do not understand how. So the debate has come here, and as I was saying, that these are moments when a journalist really, even while she writes, and she writes to the sensibilities, to the value framework of what she thinks belongs to the majority of her readers, but often that story on that tribal community or on that particular person, an individual, is not the story that that person would himself or herself tell to others. So his version may be very different from the version that media, mainstream media, is putting up.
So that makes it very complicated, isn't it? How do you then, how do you then project the Birbhum story, for instance? What is right, what is wrong?
Yeah, that is.
What are the viewpoints that you will project?
We try to, I mean, as journalists, as reporters, what we do is try to project the facts, what each one is saying. We try to reflect the stand that each person, each concerned person has taken. Though the framework of a story often reflects the stand that we would take, and that is a city person telling the story of an out of the city person. There can really be no disputes about that. When we write editorials, when we write post-editorials, then we raise the questions about values and whether, there should be some, even if we have community codes, whether there should be some kind of state regulation, some guidance, some framework on these kinds of, on such community trials. So that is another way in which we try to intellectually pose the questions. But basically, as stories, there is no getting round the fact that there are more than one story on anything that happens, and especially violence.
Okay, if a village moral is still the head man and whose decision is binding on the village, what do you think has happened to India being an economic superpower, and what sort of impact has India's economic progress or any kind of progress happened in the rural areas that you have visited recently? What impact?
The impact of economic growth on social norms is really a very complicated question. In fact, these village morals, we should not take them as, innocent of the political happenings. In fact, they very cleverly and very rightly point out that these kind of mediations, community mediations in matters of rape or any other kind of violence, is not confined to the Adivasi, the tribal communities alone. The political parties always hold these kind of social mediations, and they fine people and they get the fine. I mean, CPM used to do it, the left used to do it when they were in power, and now we know that the Trinamool Congress also does it when they are in power. So, I mean, political parties do set up some kind of community mediation in practically every case of, in many, many cases of rape that we find. And most cases, many cases, actually go to the police station only after the mediation has failed. So it is not as if it's one particular community with very traditional setup which goes through mediation and the others do not. Even the mainstream people, very large sections, and in fact even in cities, such mediation does take place.
Can I ask a question of Swati? I know enough to know that Sati wasn't abolished thanks to Lord Bentinck. I know there was more to it than that. Nonetheless, Lord Bentinck, I think, passed the act that abolished it. So would you have recommended to him to take things in a more understanding way, that he should have understood the needs of the person who was about to commit sati, or what do you think?
No, I wouldn't. Just now, even now, I feel that my position, and also, in fact, the position of my paper, is that we should have the same laws for all when it comes to civil cases. And it is true, traditionally we have had communities, we have had different religions and things, but these actually, and my position, from my position of a feminist also, I have found that these